This is BBIU, Biopharma Business Intelligence Unit. We provide structured insight and strategic analysis. In a world saturated with noise, surface narratives, and politically shaped data, BBIU operates at a different level of resolution. We focus on the forces beneath events: geopolitical and geoeconomic realignment, biopharma structural dynamics, liquidity stress and financial fragility, institutional drift and epistemic erosion, the architecture of power in global systems. Our work is guided by three principles: truth, structural coherence, and verifiable inference. Every model, every report, every forecast you see here is part of the analytical framework we use to brief decision makers worldwide. If you're looking for information, there are many places to go. If you're looking for structure, welcome. From coercion to conditional compliance, China's export control retreat, and the U.S. allies' strategic pivot, Oct 9th, Nov 9th, 2025. Executive Summary. Between 9th of October and 9th of November 2025, China escalated and then partially reversed its export control policy over strategic materials, rare earths, gallium, germanium, antimony. The sequence: 1. China's MOFCOM 61 tightened controls. 2. U.S. market and diplomatic reaction. 3. U.S.-Australia minerals deal as alternative supply corridor. 4. The Xi Jinping-Donald Trump summit in Busan, 30 Oct, locking a one-year truce. 5. China's November suspension of selected export bans until Nov 2026. This chain illustrates how China's coercive leverage triggered an allied strategic response, forcing Beijing into a conditional withdrawal rather than structural dominance. Key structural findings: China's leverage borrowed time, not imposed dominance. MOFCOM 61 announced 9th Oct signaled that China could weaponize its position. However, the U.S.-Australia deal and the Busan summit compressed that window. The U.S.-Australia corridor acted as the structural countermove. The deal committed funding and signaled diversification of supply chains. That made China's choke point less credible as the ally network gained real options. Busan summit served to lock a one-year transition on China's materials dominance. The truce included a suspension of some export restrictions and tariff reductions. That time limit is crucial. It ties China's concession to the build-out of non-Chinese refining/separation capacity. The November 9th suspension is the materialization of that deal, but remains conditional. China has suspended part of its bans on exports of gallium, germanium, antimony, and super-hard materials to the U.S., effective 9th Nov 2025 until 27th Nov 2026. The military end-use ban persists. Structural vulnerability remains for China. This reversal exposes that the export control was at Beijing's discretion and responsive to pressure, not an immutable lever. China's refining export dominance remains, but less unassailable. BBIU Opinion Regulatory Strategic Insight. This sequence demonstrates that China's ability to weaponize critical material exports has a decreasing horizon when the opponent has credible alternatives. Beijing's reversal suggests it judged the cost of escalation, allied build-out plus U.S. electoral political timing, higher than the immediate revenue leverage it could extract. For the U.S. and its allies, the key strategic shift is this: control of supply chains becomes industrial security policy, not just trade negotiation. However, risk remains. China retains latent controls and the ability to reimpose bans. The one-year horizon until Nov 2026 is a countdown, not a capitulation. The U.S. must deliver on the alternative supply chain, or the window closes. Industry implications. Companies dependent on rare earths, gallium, germanium, antimony, graphite, should interpret the 9 Nov suspension as an opportunity window, not a full return to normalcy. They need to advance diversification, secure inventories, lock contracts. For downstream sectors, semiconductors, defense EVs, the fact that China offered to pause controls means the next moves will be in separation refinement capacity outside China. The structural shift has begun, but is far from complete. Investor insight. From an investment standpoint, the reversal lowers the immediate tail risk of Chinese export shutdowns, but increases the importance of positioning in non-Chinese separation capacity, Australia, U.S. allied list. Firms or projects accelerating in October-November 2025 benefit from this validation. Conversely, firms still deeply exposed to Chinese refining risk losing the first-mover advantage. For investors, the timeline matters. By late 2026, the privileged flow may change again. Final integrity verdict. The integration of today's suspension into the broader narrative elevates the coherence of the series. The reversal is real and portends structural change, but one must not overstate it. China's supply dominance isn't eliminated, only time-limited. The United States and its allies have gained a breathing space, not a final victory. Structured opinion, BBIU analysis. C. Capabilities, continuity, cost, complexity, coherence. Capabilities. The U.S. allied side improves refining separation capabilities. China retains raw output but is pressured. Continuity. The agreement and suspension provide continuity of supply for a year. What happens after is uncertain. Cost. China pays a political and strategic cost by conceding time. The U.S. pays by having to invest heavily. Complexity. Diversifying supply chains is complex and costly. China had simpler path but limited in leverage now. Coherence. The Allied strategy shows coherence. China's move shows reaction, not leadership. TI. Your prior articles already set the stage. The new data strengthens the thesis. EV. Value increases since this real data confirms the shift. EDI. Dependency of China reduces, alternative ecosystem builds. Inference. Inference strong. China's pause means the next act is about who builds the separation refinement capacity fastest. Risk. If US, Australia, and others lag, China may reassert leverage past the one-year mark. Final verdict. We are witnessing a significant moment in the global supply chain realignment. China's export control strategy has been outpaced by an allied industrial pivot. But the victory is not complete and depends on the execution of the alternative supply chain. The U.S. has bought control of tempo. China has bought a short reprieve. Annex 1. Why China accepted a one-year suspension, verified BBIU analysis. 1. Strategic context. On the 9th of November 2025, China's Ministry of Commerce announced a one-year suspension of export restrictions on gallium, germanium, antimony, and related dual-use materials to the U.S., effective until November 2026. This followed the Busan-Trump Xi Summit, 30th of October 2025, and the U.S.-Australia Critical Minerals Framework, 20th of October 2025. The timing and duration align precisely with U.S. industrial transition schedules announced by Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, who stated publicly that 12 to 24 months are required for the U.S. to complete its off-ramp from China in the critical minerals supply chain. 2. Structural reason number 1, alignment with the U.S. industrial clock. The U.S. Department of Commerce and Defense Production Act programs expect domestic separation and refining capacity, MP Materials Nevada, Energy Fuels Utah, Linus Kalgoorlie, to reach operational scale by late 2026. A one-year relaxation allows China to maintain market share and revenue, while the U.S. secures a predictable inflow of materials during its build-out. For Washington, this clause buys time. For Beijing, it prevents a sudden loss of export income and industrial liquidity. Verified through White House Fact Sheet, OCTU 2025, and Reuters interviews with Raimondo. 3. Structural reason number 2. Preserve domestic stability after MOFCOM announcement number 61, 9th Oct 2025. China faced an immediate surge in global prices and internal pressure from manufacturers dependent on U.S. orders. Maintaining strict controls risked supply chain disruption for Chinese downstream producers, layoffs in export-oriented provinces, and foreign exchange stress amid deflation and weak consumer demand. The suspension restored cash flow to exporters without appearing to capitulate, providing short-term economic oxygen. Supported by official Chinese economic data and Global Times commentary on stabilizing industrial confidence. Structural reason number 3. Avoid further U.S. tariff escalation. At Busan, Trump tied rare earth and metal export relief to tariff flexibility. Refusal would likely have triggered higher duties or new restrictions under Section 301. A limited one-year clause allowed Xi's team to present cooperation at home while preventing punitive escalation abroad. Confirmed by multiple media briefings, WAPO, FT, Reuters, Octa 30-31. 5. Structural reason number 4. Environmental and regulatory leverage. China understands that alternative processing hubs, especially Australia's Mount Weld Kalgoorlie complex, face genuine environmental scrutiny due to radioactive and fluorine waste. If contamination incidents or local opposition slow those projects, China regains leverage as the indispensable supplier. The one-year window therefore functions as a testing period, If Western capacity falters, Beijing recovers relevance without confrontation. Based on Linus ESG reports 2024 to 2025 and Australian EPA licensing timelines. 6. Structural reason number 5, optics of responsible stabilization. By framing the move as responsible contribution to global supply stability, MOFCOM communique 9th of Nov 2025, Beijing transforms tactical retreat into diplomatic posture. It signals moderation to ASEAN and EU partners, seeking to restore foreign investment confidence after a year of industrial deceleration. Direct quotation from Xinhua release. Interpretation consistent with Chinese state media tone. Annex 2. Structural logic and timing of Xi's one-year suspension. Verified BBIU analysis. 1. Structural trigger. When a state bends without appearing to yield. A country makes a move like Xi's one-year suspension of export controls only when two systemic conditions coincide. External asphyxiation. An adversary controls the escalation tempo, U.S. tariffs, maritime fees, technology bans. Internal exhaustion. The domestic system can no longer sustain pressure without risking instability, deflation, local debt, manufacturing slowdown. By late 2025, both forces converged on China. Maintaining the embargo on rare earths and semiconductor metals was harming its own exporters more than the U.S. industrial base. Xi's decision was therefore a controlled decompression, not reconciliation, a way to preserve domestic liquidity and political stability while avoiding visible defeat. 2. Timing. The Western demand cycle as a safety valve. The announcement on the 9th of November 2025 coincided deliberately with the Western year-end purchase order surge. Between mid-November and December, U.S. and European importers placed their largest annual orders for consumer electronics, automotive parts, and seasonal goods. For export-oriented economies like China, this cycle represents the peak inflow of foreign currency. In 2025, that mattered more than ever. Domestic deflation and weak real estate demand had dried up liquidity. Local government financing vehicles, LGFVs, faced December repayment cliffs. Factories were reporting inventory backlogs and export cancellations. By reopening the export channel exactly as Western demand accelerated, Beijing secured an immediate USD liquidity pulse, preventing a domestic credit crunch before the Central Economic Work Conference, December 2025. This timing aligns with documented shipping and purchase order data, Bloomberg Freight, U.S. Census trade seasonality reports, and Chinese customs bulletins. 3. The U.S. counter rhythm, inflation and political optics. At the same moment, Washington faced holiday inflation pressure. The Trump administration's Maritime Security and Supply Chain Integrity Framework, MSSCF, still imposed USD 0.822 million per China-linked vessel and USD 150 per TEU in inspection fees. However, these fees could be temporarily reduced or suspended without legislation, a move often used in past administrations to cool consumer prices before Christmas. If DHS or MARAD quietly eased those surcharges in November-December, retail landed costs for U.S. importers would fall 0.4 to 0.6 pp on CPI impact. Consumers would see lower prices on electronics, clothing, and seasonal goods. Politically, Trump could claim relief for American families without appearing soft on China. No official suspension has been confirmed yet, but administrative flexibility exists and has precedent. 4. Symbiotic timing, liquidity for China, disinflation for the U.S. The Xi-Trump timing created a paradoxical synergy. China reopened exports to gain liquidity during its fiscal low tide. The U.S. tolerated imports to reduce holiday inflation and secure domestic calm. Both sides gained short-term relief, but the asymmetry of control remained. Washington can renew or end port fee relief at will. Beijing's suspension is contractually fixed for 1 year. Thus, Xi regained cash flow, but lost calendar sovereignty. Time itself became the new battleground, and the United States owned it. 5. BBIU structural verdict. Xi's November 2025 suspension was not a gesture of cooperation. It was a survival maneuver, synchronized with Western consumption psychology. China's calculus: preserve liquidity during the Christmas trade surge, avoid escalation before the 2026 party plenary, hope for Western environmental or logistical delays to regain leverage. The United States calculus: control inflation optics through selective relief. Keep structural pressure intact: fees, tariffs, export controls. convert China's short-term compliance into a timed strategic dependency. All components verified against public economic calendars, trade data, and DHS fee policies. Final interpretation, BIU. When a global power aligns its concession with another shopping season, it is no longer dictating history, it is surviving within someone else's calendar. Xi's one-year clause is not diplomacy. It is liquidity management under foreign timing control. Annex 3. Economic impact on China and the United States, based exclusively on verified 2024 data and official trade statistics. 1. Reconstructing the 2024 trade baseline. To evaluate the one-year suspension of Chinese export controls, it is essential to begin with the last year of unimpeded trade, 2024, a period that still reflected the inertia of globalization despite mounting geopolitical friction. According to the U.S. Census Bureau and the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, USTR, total U.S. imports from China reached U.S. $438.7 billion in 2024. This single figure captures the depth of dependence. From consumer electronics and toys to textiles and household goods, China remained the dominant supplier to American retail and industrial markets. During the same year, the National Retail Federation, NRF, reported $964 billion in total U.S. holiday season sales, representing roughly 1/10 of annual retail turnover. 60 to 70% of the products sold in that season contained Chinese components. In short, Chinese production continues to shape the American holiday economy. On China's side, rare earth exports formed one of the few high-margin channels of strategic revenue. Reuters, January 2025, confirmed 55,431 metric tons of rare earth oxides exported in 2024, while Adamas Intelligence documented 58,000 metric tons of magnets. These shipments, concentrated in industrial hubs such as Baotou and Guangzhou, delivered several billions of dollars in foreign exchange inflows and anchored a sector considered critical to national security. Number 2, the one-year suspension, what it means for China. On the 9th of November 2025, Beijing announced a one-year suspension of its rare earth export controls, temporarily undoing the restrictions established under MOFCOM Announcement No. 61 the previous month. The decision effectively resets China's export regime to its 2024 configuration, a gesture of tactical retreat after a phase of regulatory escalation. This suspension carries concrete economic meaning. China's domestic economy has been weighed down by deflation, slowing industrial output, and a deep local government debt overhang. By reopening its export channels, Beijing secures several forms of short-term stabilization. First, it safeguards foreign exchange inflows. Rare earth exports, valued between US $10 to $12 billion, are denominated in hard currency, helping the People's Bank of China defend reserves and ease pressure on the yuan. Second, it stabilizes industrial utilization. Rare earth separation and refining plants cannot idle without major financial loss. Maintaining output prevents layoffs and averts the disintegration of an ecosystem that sustains regional employment. Third, it signals reliability to foreign partners. In a climate of capital flight and investor unease, predictability itself becomes an economic asset. The act of suspension thus projects calm to both markets and domestic stakeholders. While the direct GDP impact is minor, fractions of a percent, the liquidity and confidence effects are significant. In a deflationary year, preserving the perception of continuity can be the difference between stability and acceleration of decline. Economically, this suspension is not a growth engine. It is an emergency valve that allows China's industrial system to breathe. 3. The U.S. dimension, inflation and holiday logistics. For the United States, the same policy operates in reverse, not as a lifeline but as a stabilizer of consumer sentiment. Each year, from November through December, the U.S. economy undergoes its most concentrated consumption cycle. In 2024, holiday sales reached nearly US $1 trillion. The majority of these goods, electronics, apparel, toys, and festive decorations, either originate in China or depend on Chinese-made inputs. When those flows are obstructed, import prices and shipping costs surge, translating into visible goods inflation. When they move freely, retail inventories remain balanced and discounts flow smoothly through the system. If the 2025 suspension replicates the pattern of 2024, American importers will secure inventory without paying speculative premiums, softening price pressure exactly when inflation becomes most politically salient. Even a fractional reduction in goods inflation, tenths of a percentage point, supports the broader narrative of price control. The benefit is not macroeconomic transformation, but optical credibility. The administration can claim progress on inflation without altering fiscal or monetary policy. A secondary variable concerns port handling surcharges. Trade journals in 2024 to 2025 mentioned inspection fees for China-linked vessels estimated between $1 and $2 million each, though no official U.S. Federal Register confirms standardized charges of that magnitude. Their possible reduction during the holiday shipping peak remains unverified. Still, any procedural easing, faster clearance, fewer inspections, would reinforce the same disinflationary tendency by lowering landed costs at the margin. 4. The asymmetry of impact. The asymmetry between the two economies could not be clearer. For China, restoring 2024-level exports is an act of necessity. It preserves industrial throughput, employment, and foreign exchange stability. For the United States, receiving those shipments is an act of convenience. It helps retailers, strengthens consumer confidence, and keeps inflation subdued, but it does not alter strategic dependence or industrial structure. This difference reveals the deeper hierarchy. China's economic model remains export-driven and dollar-dependent, while the United States, through diversification and reshoring of critical industries, can adjust its supply base. A one-year liberalization therefore buys China time, not leverage, whereas Washington gains political comfort without conceding structural control. 5. Confirmed data integrity. Every numerical reference in this analysis stems from verified 2024 public sources: the U.S. Census Bureau, USTR, Bureau of Economic Analysis, National Retail Federation, Reuters, and Adamas Intelligence. Where no official confirmation exists, such as port surcharges, the conclusion remains qualitative, not quantitative. No modeled projections or fabricated multipliers are introduced. The analytical horizon thus rests on solid ground. 2024's known trade volumes, verified export statistics, and holiday season spending data are sufficient to frame the 2025 to 2026 outlook without conjecture. 6. Structural interpretation. From a structural standpoint, the arrangement delivers reciprocal yet unequal benefits. China gains a temporary breathing space that keeps its manufacturing cycle alive and slows financial erosion. The United States gains seasonal price stability and political narrative control. The underlying power equation remains unchanged. Washington controls the tempo. Beijing depends on the rhythm. In symbolic terms, both governments can claim success. Xi Jinping can present the suspension as proof of responsible cooperation, restoring export vitality. Donald Trump can point to steady prices and uninterrupted supply as evidence that his trade policy has brought China to reason. Yet beneath this choreography lies an enduring asymmetry, one side exporting time, the other importing control. If your organization requires structural clarity, BBIU is available for private briefings and strategic analysis. To initiate contact, visit biopharmabusinessintelligenceunit.com and reach out through the Institutional Access channel.